Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming, and what I would like to call an RPG horror story. I know that an awful lot of us will have played with players or with GMs who have made the gaming experience absolutely terrible. Either for you personally, for someone else in the group, or for the entire group. Maybe they created an uncomfortable atmosphere, maybe they were cruel to one of the other players, maybe they had just horrible behavior. There's a lot of reasons for an RPG horror story, and it's interesting. While I would suggest that my Patreon groups are pretty well organized. I do an awful lot of orchestration when it comes to my Patreon groups. I rely an awful lot on group chemistry, and I find that if the group chemistry doesn't work, if this group does not work together, if there's a player who's clearly not on the same wavelength as the others, I will typically look to find a group for them that fits them. And in that way, I have avoided many issues, but, occasionally they come up. And so I thought, let's start another series. Let's start a series about RPG horror stories, not just so we can be fantabulous and horrify each other, but so that there might be something to learn. We might be able to pick some things apart about not necessarily how to behave, because quite often obnoxious behavior is obvious, but how to handle said obnoxious behavior. I've got a few of these stories, and I'm not going to name names. I'll create names to summarize exactly what occurred. And I'm going to protect the innocent and the guilty, because I'm a firm believer that, being publicly shamed about something only really serves to please the peanut gallery. It doesn't typically result in someone's behavior changing. So anyone who may recognize themselves in these stories, this isn't targeted at you, even if the story involves you. And I am not naming you so that you don't have to feel personally guilty. But hopefully, if you were involved in this, then you will understand why I'm talking about this, and hopefully whatever happened will lead to viewers not making the same mistakes. Sometimes it's not even your mistake, sometimes it's my mistake. Let's talk about a player I will call the Disruptor. Derek. We'll call him Derek. Now, Derek joined my World Below group. This was a while ago. This wasn't one of my Patreon groups, but it has a very similar composition to one of them. He joined one of my World Below groups a few months back. And at first glance, Derek was a very enthusiastic, very lively, very interested player. He was absolutely fascinated by the world of the World Below, and really into the setting. And that's always gratifying to me as the developer. It's always hugely ego boosting, I suppose, when someone comes to you and really just wants to keep talking about the game. And one of the other players in the same group, who had been playing with me for some time, we'll call her Emma, was a tried and tested player. She'd been with us for some time, always participates, isn't always the front of the party by any means, but she is very good at interpersonal roleplay. It's a player type that I see far too little of, someone who is very good at getting the other players to speak to each other, a sort of player character instigator, so that we're not always dependent on NPCs to steer the plot. Now, at first, I would say Derek's behaviour just seemed slightly disruptive. He would often interrupt other players because he was excited. He would turn an awful lot of conversations into a joke, and he would insist that his silhouette character, a silhouette in the World Below, is like a rogue or an assassin, was too cool to participate in anyone else's plans. But this was subtle stuff. It was by no means unique. I've seen this kind of player before, and quite often they will iron out the issues as time goes on. It was annoying, but wasn't unbearable. The rest of the group could continue playing even though this player was there. And I did speak to him and I said, hey, sometimes you're speaking over other players. Let's let everyone have their turn. And usually when I'd address it, things would calm down. The problems escalated, I think, between him and Emma more than anything else, which is why I mention her as well. She decided to play a shy character. We had decided we would adapt the Rootwinder mantle from Monster Kingdoms into the world below. To become a calling in the world below. I find the Story Path Ultra games pretty easy to cross over like that. And while there are some dialectics, and arguably the Farsighter has a certain druidic element to it, she really liked the Rootwinder from Monster Kingdom. She liked some of the edges that were available to the Rootwinder, and so ultimately we got the Rootwinder in. But a shy Rootwinder, someone very attuned to nature. Everyone else at the table was absolutely fine. Derek was absolutely fine at first, but then started targeting her. Whenever Emma spoke in character, Derek started mimicking her shy and retiring voice, her very timid approach in a very exaggerated, childish tone. Now, this isn't how Emma speaks, but this is how her character was speaking. And so Derek, at first we weren't sure whether his character was targeting her or whether he was targeting her. If she forgot a rule or wanted clarification, he would very loudly sigh. And there was more than one occasion where he would say something like, does anyone actually want to play tonight? And whenever she came up with a clever idea, usually again less to do with the plot but more about the party itself, he would dismiss them with terms like, that's cute. But here's how someone who knows the world below would do, because he had set himself up as the expert on the setting. Again, as I mentioned at the very beginning, he was really into the world below, and so he appointed himself as something of a setting authority. I asked him to stop privately at first. I don't want to address people in front of the rest of the group unless I really have to. And he apologized, not only to me but to Emma, but within a couple of weeks, it was quite clear nothing had changed. Because then came the session that we've continued to speak about since. The party rescued a settlement from the cult, the Vrot, dedicated to the lords and ladies of Rot in the world below, and found several frightened children hiding in a cellar. It was a serious moment, and this was actually a really good moment for Emma's character as a Rootwinder who had originated from this settlement to have a good personal character development moment. I described exhausted survivors who had endured weeks of captivity and so forth, and instead of helping, Derek announced that his silhouette wanted to sell these kids into slavery for profit. Now, I think it's fair to say the table fell silent at this, because the characters had encountered Hureth's Bones, a community that commonly enslaves people in the world below before, and saw them explicitly as enemies. And so I very much identified Derek's action there as being played for humor or for shock more than anything else. A lot of disruptive players do things like this. So I reminded him, that isn't how you've been playing your character so far. Would you reconsider? He just grinned and doubled down on it. And when I read the room, and I could see how upset Emma was, because she had really wanted this moment of connection and didn't want to result to PvP. She really isn't a player that gets into PvP stuff, and not many players do enjoy it. I said that it doesn't happen, Derek, and I made the mistake of apologizing. I said, sorry, Derek, I get that that's what you want your character to do, but the rest of the party aren't on board, and I don't want a big fight, so it doesn't happen. And he complained I was taking away his agency. Now, the rest of the group tried to move on, and a few minutes later, Derek started making jokes about abuse, about trafficking, laughing louder each time nobody else laughed. He, I think, was enjoying making people uncomfortable more than he was enjoying playing the game. Emma, at this point, quietly packed up her dice and left. She said, "I don't think this is for me." She left early. Now, it wasn't long after that the group chat, we communicate via Discord. No, sorry, this group, I don't know why it's important. This group communicates via Facebook. But it exploded. And everyone admitted they had been uncomfortable for weeks, but assumed that everyone else was okay with Derek's behaviour. Emma explained that she hadn't left because of fantasy violence. She's fine with that. She expects monsters and danger and so on, but because another player had repeatedly mocked and humiliated her and turned a serious scene involving vulnerable people and something her character was really invested in into a string of offensive jokes after being asked to stop. I don't know if Derek had the opportunity to check those messages, but I removed him from the group maybe before he could see them, and then I addressed him one-on-one about this. Said, "I don't think it's going to work out, Derek. The group aren't on board with the way you're playing, and we've given you enough kind requests to change your behaviour." He responded with several angry messages, accusing us, messaging each one of us individually, calling us too sensitive, saying we couldn't handle dark humour. We invited Emma back. She was absolutely fine. She apologised for not speaking up sooner, as a lot of people would, but was obviously not necessary. And we restarted the campaign a week later. And obviously, without Derek constantly interrupting, everything else became, well, calmer, more collaborative, more fun. Emma is still one of the group's most creative role players, and the campaign rolls on months after all of this. Now, there's a lot I've learned from that experience, as I learned from every single RPG horror story, and there will be more to come in the weeks to come. But the main thing I picked up was that, well, it isn't that horror and dark themes have no place in an RPG. Obviously, you can tell from my YouTube channel and my written work that horror and dark themes definitely serve an RPG. I've worked on everything from The World of Darkness to Cult Divinity Lost, Curseborn to Chronicles of Darkness, Call of Cthulhu, to who knows what else. I've worked on an awful lot of horror, so horror doesn't faze me. It was the whole consent, respect, and consideration for other people at the table. That's what mattered more than any individual player's desire to shock or provoke. A player who repeatedly mocks others, ignores boundaries, treats other people's discomfort as entertainment, very quickly undermines the trust that tabletop role-playing depends on, I think. The players should trust each other, not to go out of their way just to offend and appall, whether for crass, vulgar, childish reasons, or because they're trying to get some kind of emotional rise out of a player, maybe to spirit them into more dynamic roleplay. And that's something I'll get onto in another video, I think. The sort of player who feels like it's their job to bring out the better roleplay in others by traumatizing them. I don't think that's what Derek was up to. And I've had a couple of conversations with Derek since then. He is unprepared to admit that anything he did was wrong. And it's funny, you know, that kind of absolutely cemented position that, oh no, my behavior wasn't wrong, it's everyone else. When you're one person who says that, and there's another 5 people at the table, including me, and all of us can highlight what the issue was, I think at that point, what you need to work on is developing a sense of empathy, the ability to reflect on your behavior and understand why it doesn't work for other people, and it isn't their fault for being sensitive. I've always maintained sensitivity is a strength. It implies empathy. It implies that you can learn from others and that you have the ability to change and be affected by others. Whereas hard-headed stubbornness, some people would say that is a strength because you can allow insults to roll off you, and in that respect it is, but it can also imply a certain intractability that makes you unpleasant to be around, especially when it comes to role-playing or discussing serious topics that might be upsetting. I wish I had addressed the issue with Derek sooner, and I see myself as fairly conflict avoidant. I don't think I'm afraid of conflict. I'm more than happy to boot a player if they're being disruptive, but I have in the past given players far too many chances, and in this case nearly lost a really good player permanently, and possibly disrupted the entire group permanently for the sake of keeping the peace. And Derek in this case did not deserve that, and it shouldn't have reached the point where he was able to do what he did. Now, I've played with players who have done far worse things, and that isn't to mitigate Derek's behaviour. I've played with players who have been far more obnoxious than he was, and we'll get onto that in other videos, I have no doubt. But the Disruptor player type, that is my first RPG horror story I will be delivering to you this week, through the veil of the world below. And what I would love to hear from you, the viewer, in the comments, is a recent RPG horror story you've been through. It can be something as simple as the players didn't turn up, the players never turn up, through to something as complex as some kind of vested, deep and complex trauma that's been caused by player behaviour. It's good to share these things, not just so we can all revel in each other's misery, but because these are great opportunities to learn. We should value our tried and true, consistent players, even when they don't necessarily do glamorous actions every single session. Emma would be the first player to say that she isn't someone who likes to grandstand. She doesn't soliloquize, she doesn't act in the vanguard, but she is a great utility player and a brilliant team builder. And in role-playing games, that is essential. Certainly more so than having a disruptive player who goes around picking on other players and condemning them for not understanding the rules or the setting and just going out of his way to shock and appall. Interestingly, a very similar thing happened in a Vampire the Masquerade game recently. It wasn't quite the same, but a similar kind of action that was justified via different ways. And we'll talk about that at some point in the future. So, I look forward to hearing your thoughts, and please don't take this as any kind of representation of what the world below is like. In fact, if the world below interests you, you can find it linked in the video description below. It's a fantastic setting. Even Derek would agree with you on that. And I would love it if more people checked it out. It'd be great to get to the next badge level on Drive-Thru RPG. And remember, The World Below is the only game for which I get royalties. So if you could buy a copy, I will get a cut of the sale. That means a lot to me. So please check out The World Below, and all of you have a fantastic week.